Welcome to American Reform Movements. This is the first of a two-part PowerPoint presentation on American Reform Movements. The first part is Reform and Romanticism. The second part will be about reform and religion. And please be aware that not all of the reforms perfectly fit either into A, Romanticism, or B, religion. But that is how has been perhaps the best way to divide this up. So the first one here is Romanticism. What is going on at this point in world history, and with it U.S. history, is the rise of industry. And so people are moving from the farms to the cities, and it's in the cities that they're working in these factories, long hours, dangerous conditions. And so people begin to long for an escape. And in many ways, what they want is to go back to nature. And so what follows, industrialization leads to other ideas and ideologies like communism, but now industrialization is leading to this other thing called Romanticism. Romanticism placed its emphasis upon emotion over logic and reason, and it placed an emphasis upon nature and the individual. But we have to say this about Romanticism. This is a highly idealized version of nature. And so this is a nature that's beautiful, that affirms God and existence and the wonder and grandeur of it all. This is not the version of nature of you getting eaten by a tiger or you catching a disease, because that's really nature as well. And so this is an idealized version. And so it's the Hudson River School, this art movement, that begins to show off this romanticism in the form of art. And so it begins in upstate New York along the Hudson River Valley, and it will begin to transition to the American West. The paintings that you're about to see, they're very realistic, also a little idealized. And so it illustrates man and nature coexisting peacefully, and nature as the manifestation and handiwork of God. And so there are several painters that are quite famous when you talk the Hudson River School. The first is the originator, Asher Durand. And so several of Asher Durand's paintings we're going to go through very briefly here. And again, if you really want to look at these paintings, just imagine trying to paint these things yourself. They're really impressive. So please pause the video if you really want to look at them. I tried to get you a good high-res version of these images. So here is Asher Durand's Kindred Spirits. And the next one is the first harvest in the wilderness. Thomas Cole painted the picture that you saw at the start. This is the Oxbow, which is a painting about the Connecticut River Valley. Okay, next you have Frederick Edwin Church. And Frederick Edwin Church has some really cool looking paintings. The first one of these is Twilight in the Wilderness. The second one here, okay, is Rainy Season in the Tropics. The third is Niagara Falls. And another one here is this painting that he did of Petra in modern-day Jordan. And if you've ever seen the old Indiana Jones movies, old at this point, or if you've ever looked up Petra, Petra is a really cool place to look up, Petra, Jordan. And so perhaps the best of them all is Albert Bierstadt. This is Among the Sierra Nevada Mountains. This is Rocky Mountain landscape. This is looking down Yosemite Valley. Again, you're seeing a lot of paintings set within California or Colorado, the American West. And then finally, Storm in the Mountains. And again, I'll provide a link where you can look up some of Bierstadt's other paintings. He's got tons of other paintings. And again, some of them are really impressive. So in addition to Romanticism as an art movement, you have Romanticism in preservation. And so some of the first preservation movements take place in the United States. This is the naturalist John James Audubon. He begins drawing birds, mammals, plants, and other subjects of nature and creates a book called Birds of America. And so today we have the Audubon Society that is dedicated to protecting birds and their habitats. And so a lot of people, kind of maybe later in life, quite often, they get into bird watching and they might have binoculars. And people who really get into bird watching, if they're into photography, they get some really expensive lenses. I'm talking about the lens on the camera being more than $10,000. And so periodically what you see is you will just see that there are some people who get quite into the Audubon Society. And so transcendentalism is the next one. Okay, another response to industrialization is transcendentalism, started by Ralph Waldo Emerson. The core of it is this belief in the independence and self-reliance of the human being that should be found by looking in nature and within oneself. Okay, independence, looking in nature. How would you do that living in a city around industry? And the answer for some of these guys is they're going to have to escape the city. And so the first of these guys, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the creator, he writes two books, Nature in 1836 and Self-Reliance in 1841, describing the need for people to live authentically according to their own ideas and not conform to the larger society. Now, debatably, even more important is Henry David Thoreau, who follows Ralph Waldo Emerson. And there's other transcendentalists, but for purposes of brevity, keeping things short, we just want to say that Thoreau, as a friend of Emerson, basically, he's going to leave the city, and he's going to write his famous book, Walden, that comes about him living in a primitive cabin, as you can see here at the bottom, near Concord, Massachusetts. He denounces materialism, the collecting of goods and things, and emphasized living simply, and self-reliance. So some people look at this and they go, hey, it's the first tiny house, which is kind of a movement today of young people who don't necessarily want to pay giant mortgages for the rest of their life. And so he escapes out to nature. If you've ever played Fallout 4, the video game, there is an appearance of it in Fallout 4. But Henry David Thoreau goes on to write a book called Civil Disobedience, and this is huge. Okay? Civil disobedience states that people should refuse to obey laws that they consider unjust. Civil disobedience would inspire Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, other people to disobey laws that they felt were wrong. Thoreau himself refuses to pay taxes the year of the Mexican-American War because he views the war as an expansion of slavery. And we'll talk more about that later. Ultimately, he's arrested for that. But for Thoreau, it was worth it because he was refusing to obey an unjust law, in his opinion. Additionally, due to industry, you get the rise of education. People need more education now than when they farmed. And so specifically, you get the rise of public education. And so the rise of industrialization means that people need more schooling, okay, than previous. And so the guy who will step in here and fill this gap and push it forward is a guy named Horace Mann. Okay, he's the first Secretary of Education for Massachusetts, and he studies the education systems of other countries. He becomes the largest advocate of public schools in the United States, And today you can find Horace Mann schools, middle schools, elementary schools, high schools all across the country. Education was key in his views to individuals having better opportunities and becoming better educated voters. The North ultimately embraces public schools, while the South is initially opposed to them. And the final one here that we have is mental health reform. Okay. Prior to reform, people are caged up in prisons who have mental illnesses. And when we say they're caged up, we mean like animals quite often. They're put in places that have no heat, that have no air conditioning, and they're left there. And so Dorothea Dix goes all over the United States and Europe and finds and reports on this treatment of the mentally ill. She even gets a meeting with the Pope where she gets to convince him that, hey, they need to make some changes around there. She meets with people in the United States and gets them to reform and make changes for the better treatment of people who have mental illness. It will lead to the creation of asylums in 28 states by the year 1860.